as the image here says, this is augmented reality and art with Kaneza Schaal, who is here with us today. Lovely October 4th. So with that said, really the show, this is part of the Virginia Serious Games Institute's speaker series. We do a lot of different types of talks. It's not just video games, it's technology, it's art, it's all kinds of different things. And this really highlights it. And it's a great kind of collaboration that we've set up here. And we've actually been working on this for like over a year now with Kaneza. So both myself and Sang Nam, who runs the game design program, are here as well. But honestly, at least at the start of this, it is the Kaneza show. We're gonna let her talk about art, this kind of move to embrace technology, some of the interesting, unique stuff that's being done on her part, as well as with this technology. And then we're going to move into how we've kind of taken this journey over the last year, what that's meant, some of the interesting stuff that's kind of happened shooting for this, and with the technology and where it's going. And one of the things that we would love to do this is we love to have it interactive. So we may ask you to respond in chat and answer questions. We are definitely going to want you to ask questions. You're welcome to ask questions in chat as we go along, depending on how we're doing and how we're talking. Sometimes we're just in a zone and we may not answer right away. But we will keep track, and we will try to make sure that any question does get answered at some point, even if it's at the end when we have the official Q&A section. So we have people pretty much muted though for the moment. So, and please keep it that way. If you find a way around that, keep it that way for now. If we need to, we'll unmute people later for Q&A. But we do this so that we aren't distracted, right? You know, the dog or the baby or the phone that you forgot to turn off, those are all things that, you know, happen, and we don't want that to throw us off. So I kind of introduced some of the people in the show, but really at this point, I think I'd like to pass the microphone over to Kaneza and let her talk for a little while, tell you about her art, all the wonderful things that have kind of led us up to this talk. And then we're gonna interject as needed, and especially when we start getting into the technology show a little bit later. But for now, I'm gonna turn it off. I'm gonna turn off my mic and just let you go for a little bit. So tell us about yourself, tell everybody all the wonderful stuff you do, ask them if they've seen some of your stuff, all that great stuff. So, all right, there you go.
Great, thanks, James. Thanks, GMU team. It's wonderful to be connected with you all through this technology. I'm curious, can people put in the chat whether, did any of you see this production of Cartography? It was a performance that happened on campus 2 days ago. I'm just curious for the platform of this conversation. You can drop it in the chat. But I'll start with, somebody saw it, okay. Oh, Adrian, of course, Adrian did. So here's the deal. We're in a strange time, y'all. This has been a strange time, this time of COVID, but of everything that's going on. And, you know, I make performances, I make theater, I make opera, I make dance works. And this crisis that we've been in has been hyper local and it's been hyper global. So on the one hand, you know, we've gone to school at our kitchen tables and we've used our bedrooms to become offices and daycares, and we've like lived on top of each other and had the only retreat be the bathroom, this very intimate, hyper local kind of zooming in on our life, zooming in on our own heads and hearts, you know, being in the bones of our own psyches. And on the other hand, we've been forced to understand our connection to every part of the world, our breath, literally connected around the world. And as theater makers, as someone who thinks about performance, this is the intersection that we always work at. Big stories, massive cultural exchange over thousands of years, over hundreds of years, and a small group in a room gathering, share breath with each other, right? performers coming together to share work with an audience. And something that has been exciting in working with the GMU team and in thinking about how new technologies intersect with performance and intersect with how the technology of stories can work in the world. Some of the most powerful uses of technology today are also at this intersection, right? The intimacies of self and global access. You know, TikToks going from Sri Lanka to Brooklyn to Kathmandu, you know, and people sharing like the most intimate story of self on a massive global platform to from applications of AI to social media to how AR and VR are merging with storytelling. So I'm interested in this way that the hyper local and hyper global lives in performance and lives in some of the most powerful ways that technology is being applied in our world today. For this project specifically, and I'm super excited to have exchange with you all. I can't even see your faces right now. So stay with us and we're gonna actually talk to each other and see what is interesting between all of us to talk about. But I'm gonna share a few more things in the meantime. For this project specifically, you know, as a theater maker, you know, our practice is all about social connectivity. It's all about social closeness. So in this moment of social distance, we've had to do a lot of rethinking about the process of sharing theatrical works. And for me, there has been an invitation to consider new technologies as sites for engagement with the liveness of performance. This project specifically is a 5-minute AR performance that is built for the architecture and intimacy of one's own home. So it's a single performer performing the performance is made to be viewed in the context of your own home. And the performance itself is connected to a live theatrical work that will be touring. But as we were working through this time of COVID, asking ourselves about liveness, asking ourselves about watching performance in our homes, we wanted to create a iteration of this work that could live in people's homes in the way that we have had to reconsider theater and reconsider performance. I believe that great storytelling, that great art of all kind requires speaking many languages, and that those include formal and aesthetic languages. And those are also cultural languages and historical languages and experiential languages. And that great art requires addressing all of the materials in the room. And those materials are light and sound and text and for theater bodies. And those materials are race and gender and culture and history. And so when working with technology, that is also a material in the room. And as a person who creates performances and does not, you know, work on the back end of tech, we have to understand the collectivity, the collaboration inherent to making the work. And this is especially true of theater, but I believe this is true of all art forms. We create from collectivity and we give unto collectivity. So there are a bunch of students at GMU right now who are collaborating with us on this project. And that collaboration, that collectivity is the core of creating theater. And to talk about the generation of a live work as a singular enterprise is to erase all of this other labor that is involved in creating performance. I believe that is true for everything that we make, that to only talk about a singular authorship of a work of art, even of a technology, is an erasure of a lot of labor that has gone into the development of that idea or of that work. And so one of the things I'm super excited to think with you all about today is this sense of the collectivity inherent to experimentation, inherent to making things. So with this project specifically, we were collaborating over time on how the material of this technology would engage with the ideas of the performance. I want to share a few basic ideas about the performance, but I'm most interested in what you all want to talk about and what you all are thinking about in terms of your own practices, be that as people experimenting with technology, be that as people who are students and, you know, learning and interested in learning whatever you're thinking about, or as artists, what is actually going on with you that you're thinking about. To share something else that I'm thinking about. This performance that I've been working on, and that you will see a little bit of the technology work a little bit of the AR performance that's been developed, you will see today. But the work it's thinking about the nature of evil. And it's thinking about how legacies of evil permeate our lives all the time. And that it's very easy to identify something that we think is bad, or a leader who has caused harm. And to look at that leader and say, they are bad and we are done with them. But I'm interested in what it looks like to do both the looking outward and the looking inward that is required to remove the shrapnel of evil legacies. So this project is thinking about King Leopold II of Belgium, who had a kind of reign of terror in Congo, a huge colonial force in Congo, in East Africa, in Central Africa. And this project is an exorcism of Leopold, and a way to ask these questions about how we look inside ourselves and how we look outside of ourselves simultaneously, to unroot legacies like colonialism, like slavery, and the amount to which those legacies also live in our everyday lives. That gives an overview of things. I want to check in with James and everybody and see if that's too much or if we need to redirect, but that's an overview of what I'm thinking about coming into this project. And I think we should get into the nitty-gritty of how this thing got made and the incredible technology on every side of the equation.
Sure. No, I think that's really good. I think that's a good background. It kind of gives people insight into where you were looking, from an artist perspective, and how do you marry that with, like you said, different technologies? How do you take these concepts and make it something that you can share in a way that people will understand, right? And I think part of that, with what you mentioned with the new normal that came up with the pandemic and things like that. I mean, it was good and bad, right? I've said that in several different talks, actually. It's like it forced us to look at things that we had never really looked at before, and to use things we hadn't used effectively in the past. And so it's given us insight that we probably would have never forced ourselves to do. And honestly, that's what good art typically does, right? It allows you to look at something that you probably would ignore otherwise. And so I think that giving that background is great. And I think that what I think people would really enjoy, and I put in chat, if there's questions or there's things that come up about the process or whatever, I'm keeping an eye on it. Even if one of us is talking, I can break in and we can try to answer questions as they come up or add commentary, and that's great, and we welcome that. I think it'd be very interesting for us to kind of highlight and just kind of talk about like the journey we've had so far. So you had this idea and you came to us, like, how long ago was it? It was like, I mean, it was a while
year
ago,
and a half, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And for various reasons, it's taken this long to get to this point. And it's not just, it's just not, that we're playing email tag or anything, right? It's like, there's just been different things that have come up, right? And one of the cool things was you were trying to do newer technologies. And so if people aren't aware, and if we use words that we throw out words and we don't define them and people need to know what they are, feel free to ask in chat too, because I know that we all come from different places and different backgrounds, and we try to explain them. So yeah, like we're going to talk about like volumetric video, and we'll hopefully explain that, and all these things that go into creating augmented reality or AR. But I mean, I think it was kind of cool because you laid out this whole idea a year and a half ago, but then we had to figure out how to get it made. And I know, you know, Sang and I and you and all the folks involved here were like, now how do we actually do this, right? Because you had this idea that it lived in your home. You mentioned that, right? Like I could have you here in this office doing the performance, but then you like, how do we also use that space to do more, right? And I think we'll talk more about that in the future section. But you had like ideas of like, how do we take other elements in? It's just not just the dance, but how do we do things you couldn't do in a traditional space, right? Like without a lot of extra work, right? Like we don't have CGI like movies necessarily, but you know, you usually don't have that in the theater. So like, I mean, if you want to mention a few of the things that you were thinking about, like how do you augmented reality? I think that would be kind of cool because I think people would get a kick out of hearing some of those. And then I think what we need to do is shift over to your experience and actually filming it. So, but like, tell us like how did you envision just taking, instead of just, you know, going and watching this one person dance and getting the thing in a theater or a space or a room or whatever, and now it's your room and your space. What were some of the thoughts that you had, like the brainstorming and you know, that we had, like what were ideas in your head? We threw some of them out and we kept a lot of them, but what were some of the things that you were thinking like that could really drive home some of the points that you wanted?
Yeah, well, I think the thing that I would start with is the sense of collaboration and the exchange with both of you. And, you know, how do you, you know, part of what you do when you make a piece of work is you create a library. You know, if great art requires speaking many languages, you're making your lexicon. And so part of my library was Sang and James's knowledge of what works and what doesn't, and the fact that in this realm they have experimented more than I have. So I would say a core material for me as a starting point was the conversations with you all and saying, hey, here are a bunch of things we're thinking about, you know, what is actually going to be interesting? Like, what's our best starting point to try?
Right. Can I make it like 300 feet tall, or does it have to be the, you know, like those things? We talked about all of that, right? It's like, it's how do we translate this into this medium?
Right. And, you know, there's all these archival materials I wanted to work with, right? There's these propaganda films from Belgium and that were made that are eerie and beautiful. And, you know, I think one of the early ideas was like, could it wrap around the entire thing and you have to move through? And Sang and James were like, the payoff would be so small for that. What would it look like to ground that as a floor, for example? What would it look like for that material to actually be, if we're talking about that as the foundation of things, how could that be on the floor? Or even, you know, there's a sound file, which at some point I'm happy to share with you all. It's probably 3 minutes long, but it involves some of the archival recordings. It involves an opera that is said to have ignited the Belgian Revolution. And so we've been thinking kind of rhetorics of revolution and how they get recycled and how do you look inward and outward. So both the rhetoric in that opera that ignited the Belgian Revolution, you hear again almost in Congo getting independence, and the similarity of the language between Lumumba's independence speech and this Belgian opera is you know, getting recycled. And so early on, we were talking about all these soundscape possibilities. And, you know, as a theater maker, I always think of sound as architecture, as the foundation of everything. And in my exchange with Sang and James, trying to be like, okay, so the sound collaborators, and how could they come in, and should it be surround sound, and maybe if we get closer it gets louder, and we walk away it gets further, and it's how you guide the audience. And they were like, if people are listening on their headphones, there's nothing satisfying about those ideas. So if we want to invest in sound development, how do you really deal with what's in the room? And if the earbuds are what's in the room, you deal with the back end of developing that sound score. And so I think there's something about process as art making, and that exchange of like the actual like hardcore materials is how you aim at great storytelling.
Yep. No, I agree. And like, I mean, that was a big thing, right? It's like an artist. It's like you have to it's like what is going to be my medium to start with, and what are going to be the different elements, right? And now it's technology, and so it's like, well, are you putting it on a phone? You know, that has a certain power. I mean, these things are much more powerful these days than anything I owned growing up, but they're still limited in comparison to other things, right? Or, you know, do we do it for fancy high-end goggles and things like that, where like, you know, you're spending like $3,000 for a unit, and like nobody's doing that, right? Or, you know, some kind of, I got all kinds of things handy apparently. Or handy dandy wireless sets that, you know, maybe are $200. Or do we like, again, and I think we settle for more of a, or like, you know, like Sang is showing off here, like this kind of 3D looking glass technology.
I
And
want
like
that.
what, right? But what is it that people have and can get access to? Because it's one thing when you go, all right, you're coming to a theater, or you're coming to a location we've set up and we've prepared this experience for you. But it's another one when you're like saying, now I'm doing it from the comfort of my home, or I'm going to put some discomfort in your home. But now it's, how do we do that in a way that, you know, like you said, that the technology is huge. It's like, what do people have? You know, my office can, you know, if you look at it from a purely technical aspect, like where's the dancer going to go if I'm using augmented reality, right? Like how much space do people have, and how are they going to do it? Or do I make it small and just let it dance on my desk, you know, and then does that take away or add? And we talked about all different things, and there's still some in the plans, which we'll talk about. What we ended up setting on was continuing with the idea of augmented reality. And for those that are on here that do not know what that means, it's essentially the idea that we're adding something to a physical normal space. So for example, in my office, we're superimposing using computer graphics something in this space. So, you know, it's the dancer in the middle of the floor, or the dancer on my desk, whatever it is. It's an augmented experience versus virtual reality, where we take away your entire space and we put you in space somewhere, right? And then there's kind of mixed, which is a little bit of both. But we chose augmented reality because, again, one of the things that you said, Kaneza, is like we want to put it in people's space, right? It's not only occupying their mental space, it's hopefully their physical space, and something about that comes together, and using the technology, it makes it a different experience than what you'd expect. And so we looked at all these different ways of doing it and how to do it. We talked about modeling you so that we could like do the standard thing you do with games, where it's like you take a model and you animate it and it takes forever, or even motion capture, which again is different. But then like, and I'm getting into the weeds, and Sang, you can talk about some of this stuff too. But like when you start thinking about like how do you make games, or how do you make these experiences, or even graphics or things like that, right? All the stuff you see on these fancy TV shows, you got to figure out, well, how much effort goes into that, right? Like, and you're going to see this later. The dress for the performance is large, beautiful, flowing, all kinds of things. Trying to program that is tough, right? So it's like, well, how do we make it in film? And it doesn't, we don't want it like a 2D flat thing, right? Like that's just like, oh, look, there's a screen in my room. I'm like, that, you could do the TV and it would be the same experience, or your computer. So why do that? Like, why just, I could just watch that on my phone, right? So I lost my train of thought there. Something about the phone threw me off. But anyways, so we did that, and we settled on technology, and I think Kaneza is going to talk a little bit about the experience with this. But there's this newer technology that's called volumetric video, and I mentioned it earlier. And it's the idea that we're taking cameras all around someone or something, and we're recording from every angle so that we can basically create this 3D imaging of the experience. And it's not just a video recording, it's not just a playback. We're actually creating this model. We could actually go in and edit it if we really needed to, but it's so many thousands of frames. But it's a very interesting way of, it's like a hologram, you're creating, if you've seen holograms where they've taken Michael Jackson, put them on stage or things like that, very similar type of technology. So imagine cameras all around me recreating this, so you can basically go, hey, look, I can see the back of James's head where there's the ponytail and probably balding. I don't know. I try not to look back there. But it was an experience. And so actually, if you want to talk a little bit about that, I mean, it took us a while to line up finding people that had the technology, because it's expensive and it's rare. And it took a while to get that and schedule that. And that ended up being part of, reason it's been a little while for this journey. But how was the experience of actually shooting it, going into a theater, and doing multiple takes and having all these cameras and stuff? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so as James was saying, it's relatively new technology, the volumetric capture. And for the most part, there actually aren't many studios that, certainly the public has access, but even for private ventures, be that technology ventures or media ventures, there's actually very few studios that have this capacity. And part of it is the amount of data that is collected when shooting. I mean, James and Sang could probably translate more effectively to you the dramatic amount of data that is captured in a volumetric shoot. But part of the excitement in working with this technology is that everyone is iterating. And everyone it's not only a collaboration with the incredible, I'm going to call him an artist, I don't know what he calls himself, but Todd Bryant, who was the artist who we collaborated with on actually executing the shoot, but also literally the people making the technology. It's quite a small world once you are at that echelon of of technology. It's a really small world and everyone is working on it together. So some of the delicacies inside of the room, some of the things that are most delicate, is really how lighting functions with the object, let's call it the human, inside of the space. So it's almost like a massive green screen capture. And the object inside of the space, the evenness of that lighting is part of how the data can be collected and then controlled later on. And so the experiment with Todd was primarily around how the light, we thought would be primarily around how the lighting would function. And we did a few shoots and Todd rendered small amounts for us to look at. And the first shoot we did, my hands were like these meaty digital nubs and my face was entirely gray and kind of flat. And I was really actually into it. I was like, this is perverse. This is horrifying. And, Leopold famously had cut off people's hands as punishment, children's hands. He didn't want to cut his workers' hands, so he would cut off the limbs of the children of the workers as punishment. Those hands got collected and sent back to wives as trinkets. It's a very horrifying, gruesome reign. And there was something about the digital decay that we got back from that shoot that was alarming and beautiful. And I was actually quite excited about it. However, the opportunity to work with Sang and James and Todd, we needed to keep pursuing having the most complete data set we could to work with. So Todd went back to the drawing table, worked on lighting, invited us back, and we got to shoot again. And when we shot the next time, the dress that I was wearing is very big, and it actually broke broke the back end of the technology with the incredible company Evercoast, who develops this technology. And so because the world is small enough, Todd and Evercoast worked on, I'm not even going to try to describe it, but I'm going to say like the software backend in order for the amount of volume that we were proposing to be captured. So I guess it's the thing that I feel like to share with all of you is, whatever you're working on, when you try it and it breaks apart and then you try it again, like that's what everybody is doing. That's what we all are doing. And I think that I think that the more reverence or appreciation that you have for that process of iteration and that actual process of experimentation, of trial and error, of failing and trying again, the more reverence you have for that process, the more you can make, and the more you can expand the scale of your making, and understanding that that's the process that everybody's in. And I think that is something that people who work in technology understand better than many disciplines. I think great artists understand it, but not everybody does. But I think that's the key to kind of anything any of us are trying to do.
Sure. Yeah, no, it was an amazing experience. And we were seeing like, you sent us some still shots and some of those early takes and stuff. And I'm just like, all right. And then they sent us the data from, I guess, your good shoot, your final shoot or whatever it was. And like how big was that saying? It was like
32 gigabytes.
Yeah, at least 32 gigabytes. Yeah. And that was just one section. I think if we took both sections, because there's part 1 and part 2 of the good take, it was like 50 gigabytes. Yes. And that's why, so if people were, I asked people to tell me how many gigabytes were on people's phone in chat, and we see from 32 to 512. Very nice, Loza. So the data we got back was about 50 gigabytes. And now, this is just raw data. This is, and so, this is, techie, geeky stuff. But essentially, if you think about a movie, they always talk about it in frames per second. So how many frames of a movie are you seeing per second of the movie? And so they're doing, 30 frames per second, roughly. And every single frame is essentially a 3D model of Kaneza in the dress at whatever pose or, thing that she was doing at the time, with the associated textures and all the things that it could be recreated. And so this is, a ridiculous amount of data. And so that's been one of our first and foremost issues that we've been working with. And there are technologies out there. Again, this is new stuff that will help us hopefully shrink this down and make it manageable. But in just playing with the data to see if we can get it, we actually threw it into a game engine and created something. And so just so you can kind of see what we've been talking about, I'm going to share this one to start with. There we go. Hopefully people can see that. Thumbs up there saying, Kaneza, you can see it? Okay. It has some really funky music that I just threw in because the technology requires it. But I'm gonna let it play. Here we go. I'll turn down the music just a slight bit, but there we go. And so what you're seeing here is this is the volumetric video isolated in space. So you see this gray box, this gray just horizon. So imagine now, and hopefully you can hear me over the music, but imagine now this is instead your room or anything else that you can envision with your camera and your phone or your device, so that it's augmented reality. Turn it down just a little more. And you can kind of see, and now right now, because this is a video and it's a build that I created and I had done no optimization and we haven't messed with the tech at all, this build for this snippet of time is 30 gigabytes. So imagine trying to download on your phone a 30 gigabyte app. I mean, most phone companies and most OSs probably won't let you even do that, because that's just crazy talk. They have limits that are like a few gigabytes at most. And so that was okay. So that was really quick. I'm gonna shift gears here in a second. All right, so that one's done. That's just to show you that it can be done, and we can isolate it. We can play it back, using the bare minimum of this new emerging technology, and it's kind of cool. But what I'm going to do in the next video is actually show you what it looks like in the engine and how we could actually manipulate it, whether it's on your phone or whether it's in the game engine, and what we do and just kind of how we did it. So what we did is we took all this data into a game engine. Where's my share screen? And it's this one. There we go. And I'll keep the sound off for this one so it's easier to hear me talk. So what you're seeing now is it's a game engine called Unity. It's something that we teach within our program. It's very popular. It's probably the most popular game engine at this point. And you can see it's very messy. It's a lot of stuff that you need to know how to do in it. But what you can see is here's an isolated frame of the start of the video in this 3D space. So let me start it playing while I'm talking. And now it's going to take a second. I actually cut out about 45 seconds to a minute of it like chugging to even play this. So I just cut that out of the video because it's like, why would you want to watch that? But so now it's playing back in real time in the actual player like it would on the phone. And now this is actually the scene as if I was seeing it. So on the left side, you see a gigantic list of textures, mesh textures. Those are actually every frame that's being rendered in time. And as you see, I'm scrolling down through thousands of them. And you'll actually see there is a highlighted one that's going to come up here in a second on the left. That highlighted one that keeps jumping down the screen, that's it playing these in real time. So what you're actually seeing is, moments of time where it's like, oh, hey, I'm doing this one, this one, this one, this one. And because it's going so fast, it's 30 frames per second, it looks like it's jumping, but it's playing all of those. And so now what you're seeing in the center of the screen is it playing out in this 3D space. And what I'm going to do now is actually manipulate the camera. So just like if you were holding your phone and maneuvering it around your room, you could basically come around from any angle, from any direction, and basically create a look. And what's kind of nice is, as Kaneza mentioned, is like we can now that it's isolated in this engine, we could add in videos playing underneath on the floor. We could add in smoke effects. We could add in crazy birds. We could add in additional elements that get added to the scene, and they all play out based on where you're looking, which is really cool. So whether I'm looking from above or I'm looking from around, or I'm kind of seeing because I want to see just how crazy the dress is and how it looks. It just gives us a true flexibility to see a performance from a way that you really don't get to see often. I mean, even when somebody's on the stage, right, you're still seeing it from a fixed view for the most part, right? Even if you had a circle in the round and people around it, you're still one side or at a time usually. So it's a very interesting way to look at a performance and see it. And then what you can see is, there are there are limitations to resolution, to what you can do and how it displays. But what's really cool is you can capture the essence of someone, an essence of a performance, and really show it off. All right, and that was that. So that's kind of where we are now. And we've still got a few minutes. And what we're going to do is we're shift to the future, and then we're just going to really open it up and let people talk too.
And actually, I want to add a little bit. And I was very excited about this project, obviously. And then one thing I want to kind of point out is, my messy desktop. And just two things. Kaneza mentioned data captured and data thing. So to me, if I reflect this whole process, definitely Kaneza is author of this great content, and who's the one possess this great wisdom. And then she actually performed in front of this biometric the cameras, and then all these wisdoms actually degraded into the data. So how I see it is, in terms of this DIKW pyramid, we actually got the data. So we actually have to put them together to make it information. And then we hope to put them together in this new space, space with this augmented reality way, so that we can put them together into knowledge, so that the audience can watch this and experience this and has different types of engagement. It's obviously not the same as seeing the performance in real time in real space, but it actually gives audience slightly different version of that experience, and then hopefully they can understand it, and then hopefully they can understand the wisdom, how it all started. So to me, it was really interesting because Kaneza kind of go from wisdom to data, that we got the data, and then well, obviously we work together with original author, and then we try to put them together and present it in this digital space. And one more thing I can kind of add is postmodernism, like simulacrum and simulation. It's not exactly simulation, but how I see it is this digital copies of original performance. And then it actually, Kaneza mentioned there's like a eerie kind of horrifying version at the beginning. So here, what I try to see is this whole technology try to copy the original into the digital copy or digital twin or digital version of this original performance. Yet it create this slight like different variation. So it adds that slight difference so that it actually stands alone as kind of, yes, this is a copy of original performance, yet it can have its own life as this kind of almost like it's the simulacrum, because once it put together in this augmented reality space, it actually gains its own life, and then it will speak to audience using its own kind of again like still talking about the same contents, yet the experience would be slightly different. And then in that process, audience can gain their own interesting experience. So to me, I was very excited. And then like later, we want to create like another version of this performance using looking glass in holograph. And then if you are like a Star Wars fan, it's like Princess Leia kind of talking to you in holograph. So we want to kind of do that, do kind of similar thing to create that new experience. Yeah, that's
well. Like, don't they have that new Sparky, a robot dog or whatever? Maybe we could figure out how to play it there.
That's right.
Saying I love what you're saying about that too, because this is the first time I'm seeing a fully rendered capture. I've only seen like essentially 2D mock-ups, and something that I am so struck by is the time signature of the technology. But I don't know, I'm sure some of you on this call are video game aficionados. There's something about this that it's a time signature that is in the vocabulary of video game, but it's different. And part of what is so exciting to me about this, at some point there was, we could create an avatar of you, then the avatar could do things, we could do motion capture. And I was like, no, that's not the proposal. That's not the proposal. And it's very satisfying to see. It's like, I don't think art, I distrust like people getting too fussy about subtleties in art making, but there really is something in the capture that relates to the liveness and the digital talking to each other in a different way than happens in video games. And it's so exciting to kind of feel that texture come alive, that third thing, as Sang was saying, like, what is the third language that gets made? I'm very excited about that, and to begin digesting how we all collaborate in this new third language that we're making together to follow what's actually happening and follow the ideas through that third language and not through the starting languages, because now we have the third language to work in. So that's really thrilling. And the last thing I just wanted to say, drawing on what James said about kind of being in space, is, people are excited about VR and performance, but in some way that's an extension of the screen. That's an extension of the silver screen and our like losing ourselves in a film. But this proposal, it's the liveness of your home, right? The cat comes by or someone yells at you and you have to turn around and look. And what does it mean to work in liveness and as theater artists in ways that are perhaps beyond the way we usually think about it, but to keep investing in liveness. And so part of the AR proposal and this third language we're making is to continue investing in liveness and letting architecture and one's own context be part of the theatricality of liveness.
Yep. And what's interesting is we see it happening in other areas too. Like for the longest time, especially when we all got on the pandemic, right? Like it's like, all right, let's add in in people. I know I was guilty of it, right? We were using filters and these crazy effects that you could do with video, right? Because again, it augmented the liveness of it, right? It allowed things like I could have a 3D cat on my head right now if I wanted to. And it's, it's these things you can do. And for the longest time, I photoshopped Bernie Sanders onto my couch so it looked like he was here with me. Like there's things you can do that ground it in the reality of somebody's situation, but add to their normal reality, right? And that's just something that I think people really are looking for. And so I think that's why this really probably speaks to people as well as us. It's a different way of looking at how do we put this into people's lives versus, like you said, taking them out of their lives necessarily. Nothing wrong with that either, but it's a different experience. So cool. We have a few minutes left. I mean, the next steps for us is taking all of this and taking it from 30 gigs or 50 gigs or whatever it is down to something manageable. And that may be, creating a compressed version of it. And there's a lot of stuff they can do on it. It's just like when you take pictures and you compress them down, hopefully don't lose too much. And making it so that it can either fit into a phone, or what is, more popular these days, we host it off on the web and it just streams to your device, but you still have that same level of interactivity. And we still have the ability that if, then we want to say, hey, at certain points, random things pop around and make the experience unique, we can still do that because it's the technology comes together to do that. So with that said, unless anybody, Kaneza, did you have any final thoughts before we kind of open it up for conversation, Q&A with folks? If people want to throw out either questions in the chat or if they want to raise their hand and get on mic, I mean, we're open to any of that. But any final thoughts on kind of things you want to throw out there? Whatever.
No, just curious to hear what people are thinking about and working on, and how this does or doesn't relate to what y'all are thinking about. So please, and really, like, you can ask anything. It doesn't even have to be about this. You can ask about anything. Like really, whatever you're thinking about, we're interested in engaging with. Yeah. So please, the breadth of the invitation is vast.
So yeah, whether you use chat or raise your hand so we can turn on your mic, whatever you feel comfortable with, we're more than open. I did see a question in chat from Kirsten. Love to hear about the students who have opportunities. So Sang has actually been working on this. He teaches classes with AR and VR, and we put out actually internship opportunities for folks that work in game design as students, because we want them to actually help build this. What you saw me do was me just playing with the data to see what it will look like, but actually building that and optimizing and throwing all the little cool stuff in that, we're going to let students do all that work. I'm not the best at it either. So let's let some students do that. Let's let Sang's, excellent people do that. And so,
and we're so interested in like ideas you all have. Like I'm going to put 3 things out there just because some of you may be the people who could actually think about this with us. Right. But one of the things we want is for this archival footage to be on the floor. So these crazy films, I can send them to you. If you're interested, we'll send them to you. And then the third thing is that the kind of theatrical arc of this is this idea of looking inward and looking outward and unrooting the shrapnel of evil. And so this idea of exorcism has been a theatrical arc for this project. And one of the things we've been thinking about is, how do we animate that? What can we put in there that will work? We've looked at James are saying we'll say the name of the file, but we've been looking at like smoke, 3D smoke that has been made. Weirdly, there were these like birds that I saw that I was like, actually, I think that kind of like that expulging of material, weirdly, the birds felt like they might actually theatricalize that better. But at the end of the day, it's going to be about what the actual materials of that animated object and how it interacts with what you saw. And that's an artistic, collaborative, creative process that if you have your hands in this, you will be able to propose much more articulately than I can. I can share what I see and what I think works, but if any of you are interested in iterating, particularly on this idea of exorcism, I would love to see what you all would think about. Would love to see it.
I think one of the great things about the technology is it's not just that you can bring people together, but you can bring people, like you said, more collaborative, right? Like traditionally when we think of artists, it's like it's experience and a vision that somebody has. Whereas what games and that kind of interactive technology, and you know, some artists try this to certain degrees, but it's how do you bring in interactivity and collaboration with the experience? So it's not just your experience, but it's other people then translating their experiences into yours, and how do you continue that on? And games do that amazingly. We have these sandbox games where you can pretty much do whatever you want and bring your own kind of thing to it. And so there's some very interesting opportunities on how do you push people and allow them to interject themselves into it to a degree. So,
and I think James is pointing to this thing, and one of the great lies of the West is that idea of singularity and that idea of fixedness, right? The singular authorship, the writer, the playwright, everyone serves the playwright, or whatever the story is, but that story of singular genius is an erasure of other labor, and it always has been. It always has been. And I think there is a way that gaming and that some technology platforms today point towards other logics that have always existed, or point towards a truer a truer articulation of how things are made, and that there is multiplicity, and that that story, that narrative of the singular author, that narrative of singularity, of fixedness, is just a lie. And so I think it's super exciting the way that technology is a platform that resists that story and says that's actually a lie,
right,
and let's think about how we make things well and live in the breadth and the inherent contradiction and multiplicity of that kind of making.
And one more thing I can add is I look at it as a service learning project opportunities. And so like this week, this coming Friday, I'm going to talk to my students and share this talk. And then we are going to try to create the Facebook and Instagram like filter, AR filter, so that like students kind of try to show their own understanding of the this short performance, and then they create some sort of augmented reality filter that can be used on Instagram and Facebook. I know Facebook is evil, but
yeah,
but their software is pretty easy to follow. So we will try to attempt to create some filters for the performance.
Well, and I think it comes down to kind of what I think Gary mentioned a comment in the chat too about how do you get access to students to performances, right? Or get them excited or engaged, right? And it's not just throwing, you know, a lot of expensive like the technology at it. Like you have to deal with what people have. And like we talked about this earlier, like when we were thinking about like what is this experience going to look like, we had to think about what do people have? What can people have access to, right? These days, phones are pretty ubiquitous in most cases, but not all. But you know, headsets were definitely out. I mean, there's just, you have to figure out how do you get it to as many people as possible, so that more people can experience and, like you said, add their own take on it, which is I think really important.
Yeah, I agree.
Other comments? Oh, so good.
Oh, I was just gonna say, but people please chime in if there are other things, other questions people have. But just to Gary, I feel like this sense of, you know, cultural institutions are tasked with functioning as public space, and they rarely gather representative publics. And so as an artist, something that I think about a lot is how do you not only build the work, but how do you build the frame for the work? How do you build how the work is going to live in the world? And so I appreciate what you're saying very much. And I think that that I am interested in as an artist in this question of representative publics within my own practice. And so as James was saying, the sense of what do people have and how can they use things, you know, we just presented a piece called Cartography with Adrian and Haley, and that project grew out of work with young people who had been, you know, in 2016, young people who had been arriving in Munich in Germany when 30,000 people were arriving a day, and these kids had come alone, and they had come you know, across the Mediterranean on inflatable rafts. They had walked through forests. They had across countries to arrive in Munich. And we did a lot of mapping exercises. We did a lot of inventory, a lot of kind of creative exchange platforms. And the fact was, the phones were this massive tool in those migrations, perhaps the essential tool for so many of these young people in those migrations, whether they were coming from Mersa Matrua in Egypt, looking at the horizon line and imagining themselves across that, or whether they were walking across Syria, that the phone was this primary tool. And then even when they arrived in Germany, right, the phone was, you know, connecting people to their schools that were now bomb shelters, or a platform for learning German and schools, or talking to family who were on their own labor migrations in other countries, you know, whatever was going on, how the phone functioned. And so part of what we built with technology, with cartography, was a moment where the audience takes out their cell phones and uses their own cell phones to map their histories of movement, of journeying. And to me, that engagement with the phone as a performance site has to do with this thing that Gary's talking about, of what does it mean to pursue and engage representative publics as artists, and that cultural institutions have failed. So let's stop expecting them to do it. And what does it mean to do that work within our own practices as well?
Right. Awesome. Well, I think I haven't seen any additional questions, and I think we're just up on the 1 hour mark. So I'm going to call it here and say, thank you very much, Kaneza, for coming out and sharing your thoughts, your art, your passions, what brought this project to the attention, where we're going, and all this wonderful stuff. And hopefully in the near future, people will get to see it and experience and play with it. And thank you, Sang, for accompanying us on this journey as well, and for all the fine folks that are on the call that helped to set this up and get this done. Any final thoughts for the audience then, Kaneza, before we go? I mean, it's your show, so I don't want to just cut you off, but any final thought?
No, students, reach out. If you have questions, get in contact with us. You know, we'd love to, if this is a project you're interested in collaborating on, just be in touch, obviously through James and Sang, but you know,
Yeah.
I'm easily contactable as well.
Yep, and our emails are all on the website, so just reach out at any time. We can get you in touch with the right folks. And again, thank you coming out. The next one we have is on October 13th. It has to do with developer advocacy. So it's how do you, as a developer for games, apps, et cetera, how do you gain advocacy? How do you work better, et cetera? And then we've got several others on our page that are coming up as well for this semester. Lots of great stuff. If you have ideas for one and you want to suggest them, send it to us as well. We're always interested, and we like to do a wide variety of stuff. So thank you all for coming out. And thank you everybody for participating. And thank you, Kaneza.